Welcome to Lincoln Log, where we speak with leading historians and other officials about their stories, research, and wisdom. Expand your knowledge and indulge your curiosity here on Lincoln Log. This podcast is produced by the Abraham Lincoln Association, aiding and promoting Abraham Lincoln's life and legacy. Founded in 1908, the ALA remains the nation's oldest and largest Lincoln organization. Learn more at abrahamlincolnassociation.org. Greetings, I am your host, Joshua Claybourn, and as we've done at least one time on the past, we're going to proceed with this podcast episode without a special guest. Instead, I'll be doing the presentation this time, specifically on Nancy Hanks Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln's journey from frontier obscurity to the heights of American leadership is often celebrated as the ultimate story of self-reliance and perseverance. We admire his unmatched eloquence, moral clarity, and unwavering determination. Yet, beneath this familiar narrative lies a quieter but profoundly influential force: the enduring legacy of his mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln. Today, I invite you to reflect with me not on Lincoln as the towering figure of history, but on the woman who shaped the core of his being. Nancy Hanks Lincoln's story is one of quiet resilience in the face of relentless hardship. She lived a life marked by sacrifice, faith, and an unwavering commitment to her family. Though her life was cut short, her influence echoes across the years, woven into the moral and intellectual fabric of the man who led our nation through its darkest hour. It reminds us that even the greatest among us are shaped by unseen hands. But who was Nancy Hanks Lincoln? What was the source of her strength? How did her character, forged in the hardships of frontier life, shape her son and, through him, the course of American history? In the wilderness of Indiana, surrounded by dense forests and the challenges of frontier living, she nurtured values of empathy, determination, and integrity that would guide her son through the crucible of leadership. Her story deserves our attention not just as a footnote in the life of a president, but as a testament to the power of unsung heroes, the mothers, fathers, teachers, and mentors whose quiet influence shapes the trajectory of history. Nancy Hanks Lincoln reminds us of the enduring truth that greatness often begins in obscurity. Her life teaches us that the strongest legacies are not always built with fanfare, but with love, sacrifice, and an unyielding spirit. Today, let us honor her contributions by delving into her story, one that resonates far beyond her time and her family, touching the very fabric of our national identity. Nancy Hanks, likely born on February 5th, 1784, entered the world as the illegitimate daughter of Lucy Hanks in what was then Virginia, now West Virginia. Unclaimed by her father, she carried her mother's surname, a silent marker of her circumstances. Despite these humble beginnings, Nancy's son, Abraham Lincoln, would later honor her as a profound influence on his life and legacy. He believed his sharp mind, logical reasoning, and unrelenting ambition stemmed from her and her, quote, well-bred but unnamed father. For Lincoln, being born out of wedlock was not necessarily a hindrance in all respects. It could also be a source of vitality and brilliance, traits he saw reflected in himself. The first known mention of Nancy's illegitimacy came in the early 1850s during a trip Lincoln took with his law partner, William Herndon. In a rare moment of candor, Lincoln shared a deeply personal revelation, asking Herndon to keep it secret during his lifetime. "Billy, I'll tell you something, but keep it a secret while I live. My mother was a bastard, was the daughter of a nobleman, so-called, of Virginia. My mother's mother was poor and credulous, and she was shamefully taken advantage of by the man. My mother inherited his qualities, and I hers. All that I am or hope to be, I get from my mother. God bless her. Years later, Herndon softened this account, describing Nancy's father as a, quote, well-bred Virginia farmer or planter. He also recalled Lincoln's somber demeanor after sharing the story, writing, quote, Lincoln immediately lapsed into silence. He was sad and absorbed, burying himself in thought and musing no doubt over the disclosure he had just made. Even during his 1860 presidential campaign, Lincoln was careful about what he revealed during his mother's ancestry. When providing material for a biography by journalist John Locke Scripps, he praised Nancy's intellect and moral strength, but withheld deeper details. Scripps later wrote to Herndon, noting, quote, Mr. Lincoln communicated some facts to me concerning his ancestry, which he did not wish to have published. Nancy's parentage has long intrigued historians, sparking debates that blur the lines between fact and legend. Various theories emerged about her father, often influenced by societal expectations or personal biases. Some of Lincoln's contemporaries, including Illinois Governor Richard Oglesby and members of the extended Lincoln family, sought to refute claims of her illegitimacy, crafting narratives that fit Victorian ideals of respectability. These efforts aimed not only to preserve Nancy's honor, but also to protect Lincoln's reputation in an era when lineage held great social weight. By the late 19th century, competing claims about Nancy's ancestry fueled intense debate among historians. But modern advancements, such as DNA research, have confirmed Nancy's connection to the Hanks family, silencing some speculation while still leaving the identity of her father a mystery. Nancy's life, marked by the isolation of frontier existence and the stigma of illegitimacy, offers a unique lens for understanding her son. Lincoln's acknowledgement of her unconventional origins, coupled with his reverence for her virtues, reflects his nuanced view of heritage. For him, Nancy's life was both a source of shame and inspiration. In her early years, Hanks found a fragile sense of stability under the care of her grandparents, Joseph and Anne, or known as Nanny Hanks, in the rugged yet picturesque terrain near Knob Creek, Kentucky. The area's rolling hills and winding creek offered a natural beauty that masked the hardships of frontier life. Farming there was a daily struggle. The soil was rocky and the yields were modest. Although life at Knob Creek offered her fleeting stability, the tides of family misfortune soon turned, setting her adrift in a series of events that would profoundly shape her character and future. When Nancy was 9, her grandfather Joseph died, setting off a chain of events that uprooted her once again. She stayed briefly with her grandmother Nanny, but grief and a desire to return to Virginia soon drove Nanny to leave Kentucky. Within a year, Nanny herself passed away, leaving Nancy untethered. The family farm was sold, and Nancy was sent to Mercer County to live with her mother, Lucy, and her stepfather, Henry Sparrow. This transition brought new challenges for Nancy. Once the youngest member of a bustling household filled with aunts and uncles, she now became the eldest in a smaller, less familiar family. With her mother preoccupied and her stepfather focused on providing for the family, Nancy took on the care of her younger siblings, shouldering responsibilities far beyond her years. Even her identity shifted. Neighbors began referring to her as Nancy Sparrow, a subtle but significant redefinition that reflected her ever changing place in the world. Amid the instability, a glimmer of stability arrived with her aunt, Elizabeth Betsy Hanks. Betsy entered her life with an offer of care. Betsy married Henry Sparrow's brother, Thomas, and Betsy and Thomas effectively adopted Nancy, offering her the closest thing to parental stability she had ever known. They provided her with shelter, affection, and the limited education available on the frontier. Years later, Abraham Lincoln would speak of his mother's adoptive parents with warmth and gratitude, calling Betsy Granny, a title that captured the enduring bond she had formed with her niece. Meanwhile, Nancy's biological mother and stepfather faded into the background, known to Nancy and her children simply as Uncle Henry and Aunt Lucy. Despite the stability Betsy and Thomas provided, Nancy could not escape the social stigma of her birth. In both Kentucky and Indiana, she was labeled base born. Such cruel labels left deep emotional scars, shaping the quiet resilience she exhibited throughout her life. Scholars have suggested that these early struggles contributed to the depression that seemed to shadow both Nancy and her son Abraham. While the exact connection is impossible to prove, the hardships she endured undoubtedly forged the remarkable strength of character that would define her legacy. Nancy's experiences on the frontier, her struggles with identity, loss, and adversity shaped her. The Hanks family's story, rooted in hardship and perseverance, instilled in Nancy qualities that later emerged in her son: empathy for the marginalized, an unwavering determination, and the ability to endure in the face of overwhelming challenges. In the early 1800s, the Lincoln family moved frequently, shuttling between Nolan Creek in Hardin County and Mercer County. This constant movement reflected the relentless, uncertain life of the American frontier. During this time, little Nancy Hanks had grown into a young woman, shaped by the trials of her early years. Those struggles forged a quiet resilience and resourcefulness that became her defining traits. No portraits of Nancy exist, leaving us to rely on the recollections of those who knew her. These accounts, though fragmented and sometimes inconsistent, paint a fascinating picture. Nancy had dark hair and hazel eyes, and her complexion was described variously as dark or exceedingly fair, likely shaped by the fading memories or biases of her contemporaries. Standing an impressive 5 feet 11 inches tall, which was exceptional for her time, she had a slender, delicate frame. While not considered conventionally beautiful, she was described as moderately good looking, a comment that reflects as much on frontier sensibilities as on her actual features. Nancy's distinct characteristics left an unmistakable mark on her son. Her long arms, broad forehead, and prominent nose would become iconic features of Abraham Lincoln's own appearance. Height cheekbones, a defined chin, large ears, a wide mouth, and what some call a stringy neck were also traits shared between mother and son. But Nancy's true legacy wasn't her physical likeness. It was her character, her sharp intelligence, quiet strength, and unshakable determination that truly defined her and deeply influenced her son. Even before Abraham Lincoln rose to prominence, Nancy's intellect and fortitude were widely recognized. John Locke Scripps, writing a campaign biography of Lincoln, described her as possessing, quote, remarkable intellectual strength and force of character. In an era that often overlooked the contributions of women, Nancy stood out, a woman of quiet substance and enduring influence. In her Kentucky community, Nancy was admired for her domestic skills, especially her work as a seamstress. Neighbors sought her out to craft clothing for weddings, funerals, and other important occasions. Her meticulous attention to detail and pride in her work were traits her son would later carry into his own endeavors. Like many frontier lives, Nancy's stories was interwoven with myth. One colorful tale depicts her dancing and shouting with fervor at a church camp meeting, a vivid, if likely fabricated, image of her passion and energy. Nancy's journey would eventually bring her back to Nolan Creek, where she met Thomas Lincoln. Thomas, like Nancy, had been tempered by hardship. Together, they forged a life of determination, resilience, and shared hope, a life that would lead them to the untamed lands of Indiana and set the stage for history. Nancy Hanks met Thomas Lincoln around 1806. Thomas, a carpenter and farmer, was a man of modest demeanor, steady work ethic, and unshakable integrity. Their courtship was not extensively documented, but on June 12th, 1806, they were married by Jesse Head, a Methodist preacher, beginning a life together that would be defined by both hardship and perseverance. Thomas provided Nancy with a measure of stability, building their first home on Sinking Spring Farm near Elizabethtown, Kentucky. Life on the farm, like on most of the frontier, was a daily struggle. The rocky soil was difficult to work, and the demands of subsistence farming was relentless. But by all accounts, Nancy and Thomas faced these challenges together, side by side. Their first child, Sarah, was born in 1807, followed by a son who tragically died in infancy. Then, on February 12th, 1809, Nancy gave birth to Abraham Lincoln. Though Sinking Spring Farm offered a foundation for their family, it was far from secure. Kentucky's land titles were often contested, and Thomas became entangled in legal troubles and ultimately forced the family to relocate. In 1811, they moved to Knob Creek, where they rented land in hopes of creating a more stable life. For a time, it seemed they had succeeded. The farm at Knob Creek offered better conditions, and Abraham would later recall his earliest memories there with a sense of fondness. But by 1816, the Lincolns faced yet another turning point. They made the monumental decision to leave Kentucky behind and venture into the untamed lands of Indiana. This decision was driven by a mix of necessity and principle: the promise of inexpensive, fertile land, the hope of escaping the endless legal disputes over property, and Thomas's deep opposition to slavery, which he saw spreading through Kentucky. While these early years demanded constant effort, Nancy's steadfastness as a wife and mother became the glue that held the family together. Nancy's role in these geographic transitions cannot be overstated. She helped clear the land and establish their farm while tending to her children and maintaining the household. Her strength and resourcefulness were indispensable as the family faced the isolation and relentless demands of frontier life. The Lincolns' new Indiana home, deep in the wilderness of what is now Spencer County, offered its own set of challenges: dense forests, harsh winters, and the isolation of frontier life. Here, Nancy Hanks Lincoln once again became integral to her family's survival, clearing land, planting crops, and holding her family together. But Nancy's impact went beyond the physical labor demanded by her frontier life. She shaped her children's values and intellect, giving them the tools to navigate a world often marked by hardship. With little more than the Bible and a few other texts at hand, she taught Abraham its stories and lessons, instilling in him a love of learning and a moral compass that would guide him for the rest of his life. Her presence was a living example of dignity, compassion, and perseverance. Whether offering kindness to a neighbor or teaching her children about the value of honesty and hard work, Nancy showed, not just told, what it meant to live with character. These lessons would often leave an indelible mark on Abraham, who carried them into adulthood and into history. But frontier life was unforgiving. In 1818, Nancy fell ill with what was known as milk sickness, caused by consuming tainted milk or meat. Her death on October 5th left the family reeling. Abraham, just 9 years old, stood witness to his mother's final moments. Her burial was simple, just a grave near their home, but the loss was profound. For young Abraham, her passing was more than just a personal loss. It was a moment that forced him to grapple with life's fragility and his own responsibilities. Yet in the silence left by her absence, her lessons grew louder. Her values of empathy, resilience, and integrity became the foundation for the man he would become. Nancy may have been laid to rest in the Indiana wilderness, but her legacy lived on in her son, echoing in his words, his decision, and his leadership. In short, Nancy Hanks Lincoln's legacy is not confined to the shadows of history, nor merely a prelude to her son's accomplishments. Her unwavering moral clarity, resilience, and quiet acts of love continue to resonate through the life and leadership of Abraham Lincoln. In the wilderness of Indiana, she nurtured values of empathy, determination, and integrity that would come to define a president and guide a nation. Nancy's life reminds us that greatness often begins in obscurity, nurtured by the unseen sacrifices of those who shape us. As we reflect on her story, we honor not only the mother of a president, but also the universal truth of enduring influence, the quiet heroism of those whose legacy ripples through across generations, transforming lives and shaping history. Thank you for listening to Lincoln Log. You can subscribe to the podcast in iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. And if you like this podcast, please consider rating it on iTunes and leaving a review. This helps other people find the show.